Hello and welcome to Beyond the Filter, a podcast about censorship. My name's Jeremy.
And I'm Brandy. And in this episode, we're discussing Project 2025 and the Trump administration.
This is our second episode, and we've already had some great feedback on the first episode. One listener, who identified as an anonymous furry, wrote to us saying, "Thank you so much for your advocacy you're doing here. I can't wait to hear future podcast episodes." So thank you very much for your comment. You can read the rest of that comment if you head to our website and check out our first episode. Back over to you, Brandy. So Project 2025 and the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Tell us all about it.
I had to do a bunch of research for this episode, and I'm now depressed. It's basically every terrible thing you can imagine where censorship and free speech is involved, wrapped up into this little gift basket and pushed onto the world. And I want to do things now that I can't mention.
Maybe you can write about them in fan fiction.
I actually have been channeling some of my feelings lately into my fan fiction, because in fan fiction, the characters can turn into giant guns and do things about it, which I can't discuss. But anyway, I'll go back on topic. Yeah, so I wish I was a giant robot. Anyway, so Project 2025 was basically this roadmap for that ultra-conservatives created that they wanted to implement if Trump took power again. And everyone said, hey, look at this. Before the election, everyone was like, well, everyone against Trump was like, hey, look at this document. Look at all the terrible things it plans to do if Trump takes power. And people were like, I'm sure they're bluffing. Now it's the year 2025. Trump is back in power. And guess what they're doing? Everything mentioned in Project 2025, which I will now tell you about.
Even Trump was trying to deny that it was his plan, right? He was saying,
because
I've got nothing to do with
Trump lies, right? He's never done that before. Fuck. Anyway, so under the leadership of Donald Trump and the policy proposals of Project 2025, there is a clear push to reshape free speech, artistic expression, and digital communication in a way that critics argue amount to censorship. It's me. I'm critics. Anyway, all right. Project 2025 suggested defunding the corporation for public broadcasting, which supports entities like NPR and the PBS, which are known for, among other things, I believe, Sesame Street, because fucking Big Bird, right? At the time of recording, Republicans have put forward a bill to eliminate all federal funding for the PBS and NPR, just like Project 2025 said. This occurred following a congressional subcommittee hearing in which Republicans labeled them a radical left-wing echo chamber. So if you want a bit more background on some of the things PBS and NPR do, if you don't know, they connect to over 1,000 public radio stations and 350 public television stations, allowing these stations to maintain editorial independence and raise funds from members and sponsorships. And that's now what the Trump administration has labeled enemy number one.
So are there any other public broadcasters or arts institutions that are also affected by Project 2025?
Yes, there are. For example, Project 2025 also aims to either overhaul or shut down outlets such as Voice of America and Radio Free Europe. These are outlets started around the Cold War with the aims of reaching people in Eastern Bloc countries to try and balance out communist propaganda. And they still exist. They broadcast worldwide and aim to provide unbiased news in places where free press is limited or non-existent. They reach 420 million people in 63 languages, over 100 countries each week. And at the time of recording this, Trump has signed an executive order to strip back their funding, with virtually the entire staff being put on leave. So not only is this impacting free speech and the dissemination of information in America, it's impacting the entire world. Before the election, I got into arguments with Americans over who they should vote for, and they were like, why are you intruding into our election? How does this affect you? Oh, fuckers, sorry. But some American. I mean,
We need to
when I
put
say
a content
Americans,
warning on this podcast.
yeah,
May contain strong language.
and strong feelings. So I just want to do a disclaimer. When I say Americans, I'm not talking about the Americans who did the right thing last election. You guys are great. I'm just talking about all the rest of them. They don't seem to understand what a massive impact their country has on the rest of the world, which we're now seeing. Yeah, I've said so many times, I feel like we should have a right to vote in American elections. Uh, yeah, I know that's ridiculous, but when your country has such a big impact on the world, that's how it feels. Project 2025 has also suggested defunding America's National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities, which support independent artists, museums, theaters, and literature. As of the time of recording this, wonderful Department of Government Efficiency is recommending extreme cuts to the National Endowment for Humanities, including a reduction of staff for as much as 70 to 80% and cancellation of all outstanding grants made under the Biden admin. This is the organization that awards grants to museums, historical sites, universities, and libraries. Sorry, I'm repeating myself, but I feel like that's a point that should be emphasized. They're making themselves the enemy of museums, universities, and libraries. Has there ever been anyone on the right side of history that made themselves an enemy of museums, universities, and libraries?
We do have some historical precedents for this, which I know you're going to get to later, but keep going. What else is there? Now, I heard there was some changes to the performing arts as well.
Yes, so Trump has put himself as chairman of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. This is the National Cultural Center of the USA. Traditionally, the US government has funded the center, but not had a direct say in what's being performed there. But Trump, he's appointed himself chairman, he's purged the bipartisan board, and now he's saying he wants to eliminate any sort of so-called woke performances there, claiming that all the shows at the Kennedy Center are terrible and a disgrace, but also saying that he's never actually been to one.
So media and the arts, but it doesn't stop there, right?
No, it does not. It never stops. For the love of God, make it stop. Yeah, so he's also very much about purging certain words they don't like from government institutions. These words include things such as diversity, gender, racism, and women. The word women is a dirty word now. All these federal agencies are trying to, going through all of their online documents for these keywords and just eliminating them if they contain them. I imagine a lot of people have probably already heard this, but it's such a ridiculous example. I've got to list it. The website showing the plane that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima was eliminated because the name of the plane was the Enola Gay. And that's just one example of these things that keep happening because efficiency, right? All about like that governmental.
I think these. How do you pronounce it? Is it Doge? Is it how do you?
It's Doge, like after the meme, because haha, we're so funny, we're so hip with the kids.
I think their main qualification seems to be like a search and replace.
That's literally what they're doing. No, they're not even replacing; they're just searching and getting rid of anything that contains these words.
No,
and the people doing it, they're like kids. They're like 19-year-old kids. It's the impact on science that upsets me just as much as the impact on free speech. But free speech and science are obviously intimately connected. I don't know, maybe we could do... Well, that's a good idea for future episode, actually. Free speech and science, the connection. Let's write that one down. Anyway, back to it. So the National Science Foundation is another government agency that's having to comb through all their active scientific research projects to find mentions of words like trauma as equity and excluded, as though our scientific institutions don't currently have much better things to be doing right now. I don't know, curing cancer. That'd be nice. I'd really like a cure for cancer. There's one instance that a case study of a patient with endometriosis was taken down simply because the final paragraph said that it can be harder to diagnose endometriosis in trans men and gender diverse individuals due to a lack of understanding. Due to that one line, this entire case study has been removed. How is that? My God.
It's just wanton destruction of
It is.
institutions of knowledge, and just for the sake of, I guess they want to raise the ground and build it all up again in their own conservative image.
Well, yeah, I'll get into this later on, but yeah, that's a big part of it. But I've got this theory that some of the people that do these kind of things, they don't have the spark of creativity in them, but they're jealous of people who do. They're jealous of people who are capable of creation. And of course, destruction is far easier than creation. So they go about destroying as much as they can because they hate people that get the attention for creating things. Look at how much attention Trump has at the moment. I really don't want to be talking about him right now, but I have to because he's destroying so many things that I've got no other choice but to talk about him. I'd much rather be talking about people who are creating wonderful things, but I can't because he's stopping them from creating wonderful things. This also extends to schools, and there's this whole thing against diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're removing that from science, and also from schools, universities, and other cultural institutions, which means, fewer grants for diverse storytellings, more restrictions on what can be taught, limited funding for multicultural arts initiatives. There's a particularly infamous example, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this year, an Idaho teacher being ordered to remove a poster in her classroom. I'm pretty sure it was a primary school or middle school classroom. We don't have middle school in Australia, so we get mixed up about these things. That simply reads, "Everyone is welcome here." Next to an illustration just of hands. It's just a banner, a bunch of hands of different colors with like love hearts. And then above that, it says, "Everyone is welcome here." And she was told she had to remove that. She was told that everyone is welcome here as a matter of opinion. So I guess they didn't want people who don't believe everyone is welcome here to not feel welcome, I guess.
I'm surprised at that. I would believe it more easily if it was a rainbow like LGBTQ banner, because we know they're coming after queer people, but these are just skin tones. Are they really going to be that blatant about being literally racist, like overtly racist?
It's unbelievable. I feel like I keep saying this. I feel like I'm living in an episode of South Park. No, I saw the other day South Park is advertising itself as a drama now because they can no longer say that it's like a comedy.
Yeah, like
my God,
the Onion headlines are now more plausible than the real world headlines that we're reading.
Oh my God. Yeah. Anyway, I'll move on. We are also expanding the definition of obscenity. Apparently, I believe Project 2025 has suggested reviving the Comstock Act. Okay, I'm a bit confused about this one because when I was researching it, it was unclear whether the Comstock Act is still in place or not.
I can shed some light on that. So yeah, it's a dead letter, and the problem with having laws on the books that can be applied in a way that infringes rights of freedom of expression and so on is that you're going to get someone like Trump coming along and using those laws, and they don't have to do anything because they're there on the books.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important that we don't pass laws just in case we need them and not enforce them, because nothing is stopping someone else from coming along and deciding to enforce them. So
yeah.
And this is the case with a lot of things. Like a lot of US states still have laws against sodomy and things like this. Like Texas has a ban on the number of sex toys that you're allowed to own, for example. That's another example of one of these laws that's on the books. I think you're not allowed to own more than 6 sex toys. And so, people just laugh it off. Like, who's going to come checking your sex toys? Believe me, they're going to come checking your sex toys now. They want to lock up the freaks. And if they can find any excuse to raid someone's house and they happen to have more than 6 sex toys, that's a reason that they can arrest them now. So it's really important that, just like the Comstock Act, it may have been dormant for a while, but it shouldn't have been there at all. Like it was outdated 100 years ago. Why is it still on the books now?
Yeah, so the Comstock Act criminalizes the mailing of obscene materials. This can be used to target adult content, including pornography websites and platforms like OnlyFans. and sexual education resources, including abortion-related content. I think I read that it could also restrict the mailing of like a Plan B and stuff like that. Yeah, and speaking of criminalizing adult content, 20 states in the US currently, including Texas, Louisiana, and Utah, have already passed laws requiring ID verification for porn sites. And as I found out when we were both trying to get our websites up and running, people really don't like having to give their ID to a website where they're going to be looking at porn for obvious reasons. So, and there's a chance that this law could be expanded federally.
I think we'll come back to this in future episodes as well, like the doctrine of obscenity. What's it even for? Like, it's really just because some people get offended by certain content and they don't want other people to be able to enjoy it. It's got nothing to do with safety. It's got nothing to do with abuse, because obscenity is kind of by definition, right? It's fictional, it's fantasy. There are better ways to deal with offensive content, which again, we're going to be talking about more in future episodes.
And obscenity is so vague.
Obscenity is, there's this I know it when I see it standard, which basically means that a conservative white male judge gets to decide what content is obscene, and surprise, surprise, they may not have the same view as, certainly marginalized groups have a history of creating content that others may find obscene, but for them it's not. So same with fan works. Fan works, once they explode outside of the mainstream, people can be offended by them and try and get them shut down, but no one was complaining about them while they were limited to the community that was creating and sharing them. So anyway, we will give much more attention to this in future episodes.
I think, Jeremy, you wanted to talk about increased executive control over digital speech.
Yeah, so this is really following on from what you were saying about the ID verification for accessing content that may be harmful to minors. Section 230, also called CDA 230, is an American law that is regarded as part of the free speech infrastructure of the internet, because it incentivizes internet platforms to allow their users to express themselves freely. And it does that by saying that the internet platform is not responsible for what the users say. Obviously, there are going to be some exceptions to that. Criminal law is an exception to that. So if you have people making imminent terrorist threats or something like that, that wouldn't be counted. But anything else that users say online, they're free to do so because the platform that they're posting on isn't going to be held responsible for it. And both sides of politics are against this, but it is particularly a problem for conservatives because they feel that social media platforms have been biased against them, and they would like to change that and force internet platforms to carry more conservative content. So I don't think that we can say that that's even true anymore, though, because, with X under Elon Musk's control and with Facebook and other platforms also moving over to support of Trump, I don't think there's really no reason to argue that there's a bias against conservative voices on social media anymore, if there ever was. So who are these woke companies that are being targeted now by removing Section 230? It doesn't really serve any purpose. The only thing that it does is that it causes platforms to be more restrictive about what they allow. Maybe they might not want to allow protest movements. They may not want to use art as a form of dissent, like satirical cartoons. So there are so many things that platforms will be more cautious about allowing if their liability shield in Section 230 is removed. Unfortunately, this one can't be blamed entirely on Trump and Project 2025 because the Democrats want to remove this as well. They think that platforms should be held responsible for what they post online. They just have slightly different reasons for thinking that. They would actually like platforms to do a better job of removing misinformation. and other undesirable content like that. But at this point, it's one of the few things that we have preserving freedom of speech online. And if we do away with that protection, we're just going to see what the government wants you to see online. And anything that could potentially put your internet platform in hot water, they're just not going to allow in the first place.
I'm just praying to a God I don't believe in that all the Americans that didn't vote are learning a very hard lesson. We told them don't put your hand on the stove. It's really hot, and they're like, I want to put my hand on the stove. You can't stop me from putting my hand on the stove. Now they put their hand on the stove, and they're like, oh no, the stove is hot. And I'm just like, yeah, you got to keep it on there for the next 4 years. Maybe next time you'll remember. Anyway, God, if this podcast somehow survives 50 years in some record somewhere, and you're a high school student reading what happened, can you please just remember the rest of us were as confused by this as you no doubt are when you're reading it. You're like, how could they let this happen? We don't know how these people let it happen. It's made me completely change how I think about Nazi Germany. I was just like, wow, the Germans, they must not have understood what they were voting for when they voted in Hitler. I was like, oh wait, must be what all the Germans who didn't vote for Hitler felt. No, there's just a whole bunch of people who are malicious idiots, turns out. Fuck. Please look back on me specifically with understanding.
Let it be known that Brandy Brightman stood up against what followed.
Well, I sat down in front of a microphone at least.
Okay, so where are we at? Is there more that Project 2025 has in store, or?
Well, so one of those other many scary things about having Trump in power now is that he has repeatedly threatened to change libel laws to make it easier to sue journalists, authors, and news organizations that threaten him or criticize him or just speak the truth about him. For example, he has repeatedly attacked Times versus Sullivan. This is a Supreme Court ruling for the past 60 years that have protected American journalists, which sets a high constitutional bar for defamation cases. So to successfully sue public figures must show that not only a journalist has published a falsehood, but that it did so knowingly or with reckless disregard for truth. And in the past 6 years, both the Supreme Court justices Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch have both called for it to be reconsidered. And as I just mentioned, Trump himself is not a big fan of it because back in 2022, sued CNN for defamation over their use of the phrase "the big lie." And this case was dismissed due to Times versus Sullivan protections. And even if Times versus Sullivan is not overturned, Republican-controlled states could pass laws that erode free press protections. So, yeah, that's not great.
So what is the stated motivation for all of this? Because I'm seeing little jigsaw pieces fitting together here. We've got the control over media and the arts. We've got censoring language. We've got the definition of obscenity. We've got Section 230. We've got foreign policy changes and libel laws. But what's the objective of all of this? What are they saying that this is for?
Well, they claim, as they often do, that it's to protect the children. Because apparently, we discussed this in our intro episode, but I'm pretty sure one of the biggest killers of children in the US is gun violence, and something that's going to be an increasing killer of children in the US is probably going to be things like measles and other avoidable illnesses, thanks to the worst Kennedy now running America's public health system. But yeah, what Republicans claim to be really worried about influencing our children are things like sex education and LGBTQ plus issues, because it's about protecting family values and traditional gender roles. There is one state, I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, that has proposed a bill to ban gender non-conforming haircuts, which I think is something that they've rumored to have in North Korea. So that's a great role model to model yourself on.
We're going back to the 1950s or worse than that.
Yeah, like what the? And yeah, so that they're claiming this is a large part of this is about protecting the children and restoring traditional morality, fighting cultural Marxism and leftist ideology with what they label as degenerate and immoral and opposed to traditional American values. You know, traditional American values like the separation of church and state. They're promoting all this Christian nationalist conservative values, claiming it's what's traditional in a country that was founded on, well, sort of founded on Enlightenment values. It's also founded on a bit of genocide. You know, it's a mixed bag. Mixed bag, America.
The weird thing is that you wouldn't look at Trump or Vance or any of these people and hold them up as bastions of morality. Like the way we've all heard the stories about Trump and his locker room talk and the way he treats women and
Repeatedly convicted of sexual assault, Donald Trump.
yes, the idea that he or his administration are in any way Christian or morally upstanding is rather laughable.
It kind of reminds me of how, like, a lot of evangelicals are big Israel supporters despite being anti-Semitic because they think that Jerusalem needs to be in Israel for the end times to come about.
Yeah, you've got to wonder if it's also a bit of anti-Arab racism thrown in there as well. We clearly, a lot of Israelis are against the actions of their government.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of progressive Jews, but the way that the American right sort of has attached itself to their cause is suspect at best.
And
so we have a religious agenda, we have the argument about protecting children, which is really warped into something different. We have, as we've discussed, there's a big tech pushback against big tech on the assumption that conservatives are being silenced there, which, as we've mentioned, isn't actually the case. But the idea of punishing big tech to bring them along to the Project 2025 cause seems to have been pretty successful. I mean, big tech are playing ball now. So then there must be more sex that they can bring into this. What else have they got?
They're also claiming that they're combating like sex trafficking and porn addiction, which really ties back into what our whole project has been about. Like, because there's all these like anti-scientific ideas about what causes sex trafficking and porn addiction and all those kinds of things that we ourselves, or especially you, Jeremy, have been trying to fight against with our advocacy. But the conservative line is that pornography is a public health crisis, and that like threatens marriages and enables sex trafficking, and that they're claiming that getting rid of this stuff will improve the nuclear family and all that kind of thing, which I would like to point out, similar to things antis and fandom say. Just saying.
Yeah, well, this is a theme we'll return to as well. So we've got, these are the stated motivations that they're claiming justify the censorship measures that you've spoken about. But look, there must be more to it. So what underlies all this? Reading between the lines, what would you say are the real motivations behind this that maybe they're not stating up front?
It's all about the power, and it's all about the money, mostly. So they're obviously free speech and the right to state facts obviously does not work in the favor of Trump or all his cronies, because if you actually pay attention to what he's doing and what it's saying, it's all terrible for the country. By saying that they're banning, like silencing all these news outlets and all these avenues of free expression, by saying that these things are immoral or leading to sex trafficking or like corrupting the minds of children, they can then, by getting rid of the things that are able to criticize them and point out what he's actually doing and the actual impact it's having on America and the world. So like weakening defamation protections are able to cripple watchdog journalism, and obviously silencing independent media is silencing all the people he can't control when they're criticizing him. Removing funding from the arts, loads of criticism of like government institutions and politicians happens through the arts. Like I went to see Mickey 17 the other day. It was quite fun. And the main villain in that was very clearly like Trump with maybe a little bit of Musk like sprinkled in. Um yeah, when you can't directly criticize a public figure, you can always indirectly criticize them through parody and metaphor and things like that, which is why I think they're probably targeting the arts. Yeah, so by like defunding independent journalism, the only like news sources that are going to be left are corporate owned conservative media like Fox News, Newsmax, Daily Wire. Also by having making art more conservative and like say Christian, it also benefits like mega churches and right wing think tanks because like if more people are going to be like consuming art that's filled with sort of religious and conservative propaganda, it's going to start more, it's going to like push more of them towards like mega churches and the like, which means more funding for them. And lastly, well, probably not lastly, but lastly out of the reasons I can think of, is that all these ridiculous things they're doing are distractions from the equally ridiculous but also very harmful things they're doing that are damaging the economy and damaging people's quality of life. So like Trump will be rah-rah-rahing on about how he's like making sure like 17 trans girls can't perform in like high school sports, while in the background he's like just completely taking away people's health care, their retirement funds, stuff like that. But so long as these like ridiculous culture war things are in the forefront, people don't have as much attention to focus on the things he's doing to directly harm them.
Yeah.
Basically making so-called woke culture into this huge boogeyman to keep people afraid of that instead of afraid of what Trump is doing.
Yeah, a lot of these news stories about woke culture are literally, one trans person on a sports team, one school library that has a controversial book in it. Like these often generate so much airtime over tiny little distraction issues, as you're saying, that affect a handful of people or a small community. And instead, it draws attention away from things like these tariffs, which are going to affect millions of people, the
Maybe even
social
billions of
security
people.
and other safety. Yeah, exactly. And, people's
And
futures,
penguins.
people's livelihoods are at stake here. And yet we're so interested in trans people using, what bathrooms are they allowed to use and that sort of thing. So we have been through what they say they're doing and why. We've been through why they're actually doing it. But at the end of the day, what are we expecting to be the outcome of all of this censorship? It's happening whether we like it or not. What can we see in the years ahead if we don't put a stop to this?
A shit show. Yeah, so in other words, much more homogenized and culturally conservative public sphere. So I guess art and media will reflect the sort of culturally conservative Christian ideals that Trump pretends to like. Or I don't know to what degree he actually likes it. The stuff that serves him and his cronies, basically. We'll see independent and artists and media creators struggle to find funding and distribution. They'll get fewer grants, probably face bans on various platforms. We'll see an artistic monoculture, quite possibly, that with government-backed institutions prioritizing sort of traditional patriotic and religious themes, there'll be much less avant-garde, socially critical art. We'll see the elimination of themes dealing with like sexual themes and gender issues, or like the struggles people face with things like racism, various other forms of discrimination. And we'll also probably see a lot of artists and journalists self-censoring before the government can face them with legal backlash. There'll probably be adult content creators will have to worry about criminal charges under stricter obscenity laws. We'll see platforms like YouTube, Patreon, and TikTok, if it still exists, preemptively removing content to avoid lawsuits, which means that a lot of people who rely on these platforms for their income streams will be in an even worse place and what will no doubt be a terrible economy very soon. Yeah, and same goes for payment processes, which are already hard enough to work with.
This is definitely something that we wanted to cover in this series, not just official censorship, but also self-censorship and what causes people to self-censor. A lot of the constitutional guarantees of freedom of expression that are in the US Constitution, for whatever that's worth, are easy to get around. For example, the age verification laws don't directly say you have to verify age before people are allowed to see this content. What they say instead is if you don't do that, then you can have private lawsuits. And the private lawsuits are an indirect mechanism of censorship. And that makes all the difference legally, even though the outcome is the same, because it's not the government levying a fine, it's private lawsuits that have exactly the same effect as a fine. And unfortunately, the Constitution in that light is pretty weak. It's actually pretty easy to work around. And it's not the safeguard that we may think it is.
That's a really, really good point, which I did not know. And yeah, with all these bans on this kind of material, it's all going to go down into the black market. It's all going to go underground, and we're going to see black markets popping up, which will actually cause more harm because it's going to be harder to regulate down there, and things that perhaps actually should have been dealt with will. So, like, people who might be just looking for relatively like harmless fantasy content will be going down into these underground sort of black markets where they'll be exposed to things that actually should be kind of regulated and prosecuted. Like, I think during Prohibition, I'm remembering high school history at the moment, so forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but I think there were a lot more alcohol poisonings during Prohibition because, like the bathtub moonshine, it can poison you a lot worse than things that are made of properly regulated breweries, and it's going to be the same with pornography. Like, it's going to be, if there's no like pornography distributors who are like checking if the stuff being made is consensual and legal, it's going to be all the stuff people are going to out to find is going to be mixed up with all this like really shady shit.
Yeah,
and people are going to get exposed to it.
I was reading a headline today, actually relating to the UK, but it applies just as well to other countries, saying that there's been a massive increase in people accessing illegal content online. And I have to wonder if it does have something to do with the fact that the UK has such a tough line on fantasy and cartoons and stuff like that. Because people who may think, look, if I'm going to be in for what they call it, in for a penny, in for a pound, or something like it. Yeah, like if I'm into horny cartoons, let me go to this place where I can see them, and then actually there's some stuff here that I didn't want to see. But by that time, you've committed a crime, and it would be so much better if we didn't have this conflation of crime scene photos and videos with what the law regards as obscene art. It's just really harmful, and I think people are too afraid, except on this podcast, we're not too afraid, but a lot of other people are too afraid to talk about this. And, why should obscene art, if you want to call it that, why should it be allowed? What's the value of it? And I think there is a lot of value because people's imaginations are not that easy to control. People's instincts, they don't often know why they seek something out. It's just part of who they are, and you're not able to control that just by making it against the law. Do you really want these people to be forced into unsafe spaces? It's just short-term. It's really short-term thinking.
Yes, that's everything about them is short-term thinking because they're not going to be alive much longer because they're all old men, most of them. Which explains a lot now that I think about it. Old men with bad relationships with their children. And yeah, so we're also going to be seeing more reliance on decentralized and encrypted platforms, which might actually be helpful for us with our decentralized encrypted platform. So this has a silver lining.
There are still those who would like to shut off those platforms as well, so that anything that happens online has to be subject to government approval or government oversight. And we'll probably talk about that in future episodes as well. So on the other hand, we saw the headlines recently about that Signal chat, which the Trump administration was using. This is actually an encrypted platform, and they're using it themselves. So, they can ban it, but they're going to be shooting themselves in the foot just as much as everyone else.
That is the nice thing. The one positive is that not only are they malicious, they're all also extremely stupid. So everything they're doing to harm others, they're also harming themselves. So that's nice, I guess. That's one upside of all this. Yeah, so we're going to see a suppression of protest and dissent, and just so like again with like the increase in libel laws and all that jazz, we're going to see the freedom to protest curtails, and people and them using these justifications like fighting obscenity to for example, there were I think they were called Pussy Riot. They're also a band, but they're also, I think, a movement in Russia, and they used like there were women who would protest topless to protest the Putin regime, and like if women wanted to do that in America, they could now be like, slapped with an obscenity charge to silence their protest. And like that's a more like in your face example, but the more the definition of obscenity is expanded and made more vague, the more like that law could be used to target all forms of protest, and it could go from silencing explicitly progressive voices to being used against pretty much anyone. Like this is more about immigration, but I saw someone say something that sort of touches on a similar sort of point, in that if you don't allow due process for non-citizens, it means you don't allow due process for citizens. Because if the government wants to get rid of you, they just label you a non-citizen, and then you don't have due process to prove that you are. And it's sort of the same sort of slippery slope that applies to protest in general. It's the whole they came for the non-binary queers with colored hair, and I did not speak up because I was not a non-binary queer with colored hair. And then eventually they came for me, kind of thing. It's they're starting here, but eventually it's going to be against all people opposing the Trump regime, no matter how non like queer and progressive your reasoning may be. Like even if you're just against him for purely your selfish economic reasons, they're going to find a way to use the same anti-protest and anti-free speech laws that they're using against the sort of the most vulnerable people in society, and then they're going to use those laws against you.
We see it all the time. It's a shame that this is not a video podcast, because otherwise people could see that you have the coloured hair.
Yeah,
it's looking great.
I gotta get it done next week.
You just have to imagine it, listeners. Okay, so
yeah, every time I argue with like a MAGA or something, or the like on Facebook, they're always like, "Yeah, well, you've got coloured hair, so go slit your wrists, like I'm sure you were planning to do anyway." I'm like, okay. Well, yeah, well, you're a man in a truck with a beard and glasses, so I can play that too. That's okay. I actually like some men with beards and trucks and glasses. Shout out to all the bearded truck guys and glasses who listen to our podcast. I'm sure there's plenty.
And shout out to the coloured hair non-binaries as well.
Yeah, you too. We got to be all in this together.
I know you've taken an interest in the history of censorship, and we've mentioned a couple of times the Nazi regime as like the go-to example that we always have, but that's not the only one, right? I know that there are some other lessons that we can learn from history about what's happening now, so including but not limited to the Nazi era. What should we learn from history? What are some other examples of censorship throughout the ages that we should be aware of?
I won't go deep into this now, since I think this could be a subject of a future episode, but I'll just throw out a few names to give people an idea of what we're hearkening back to, these wonderful role models that Trump seems to be imitating. One is, as you said, Nazi Germany. I do need to mention that one, because they, like what's happening now, they censored literature and art and music that they deemed degenerate and un-German, and this was happened in the guise of protecting public morality. For a more close to home example for Americans, there's the McCarthy era of the 1950s, which targeted artists, filmmakers, and intellectuals who were suspected of promoting leftist ideas. I'm just going to go on a tangent here, because there's a Cold War, sorry, maybe this is inappropriate to mention, but there's a Cold War bar near where I live. They had a special, maybe they did this specifically because of what's happening in the world now, but they made their limited edition monthly cocktail, the Lavender Scare, which was a lavender flavored cocktail, and it came with an information sheet about the McCarthy era and how they targeted queer individuals during that time. So yeah, they did target people within the government suspected of being queer because they feared that they would be more susceptible to blackmail. So it'd be interesting that the more like these kind of things become criminalized, the more that they can become the basis of blackmail. They're basically creating their own weak spots, because if you label like broad aspects of the human condition obscene, you're then forcing them to be something that people need to hide, and then you're turning them into blackmail material that foreign governments could use to like compromise um, your own people. So there's also, of course, the Soviet Union had state-controlled media, which is hilariously ironic. Like historically, or at least recently historically, Republicans have been the one, like the small government party, who are like anti-government interference, anti-taxes, stuff like that. But recently, it seems to be flipping on its head with not only with like these tariffs, but also all this government interference in so many areas of people's lives. So I don't know if you want to call it hypocrisy or horseshoe theory or whatever you want to say. But yeah, if you're.
It definitely means the left to right dichotomy is not really applicable. It's more of an authoritarianism to libertarianism, I guess, or something. I mean, maybe our language isn't sufficient to describe this axis anymore. But yeah, I mean, it's no secret that Putin and Trump get along. He also, gets along with North Korea. He's said a lot of good things about it, whereas he's got a lot of bad things to say about.
Yeah.
So make of that what you will.
This topsy-turvy world. Yeah, and like I think also, because I've got a note here about China and their like how much they control speech and their internet, and of course the artistic expression and everything. But another parallel I've heard is that they have this app. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's basically like an everything app that they use for everything from like bank transfers and, well, a bunch of stuff. And from what I've heard, that's basically what Elon Musk's aim with the website formerly known as Twitter is, to basically convert it into an everything app. And of course, having an everything app, if your whole life revolves around this app, imagine how much your life is going to be disrupted if they decide to ban you from it or the like. It's another way of having so much more control over an individual, which, as I said, parallels to what's happening in China. I mentioned Iran last episode, and again, we could probably find parallels between the Iranian theocracy they have and the sort of Christo-fascist state that Trump seems to be trying to put in place. And of course, the another very obvious parallel is Putin's Russia. As far as I can tell, Trump basically wants to be like Putin. He's even suggested staying in power with a similar method that Putin used to like get around the term limits there. So he's at the end of the day, I think that you can boil Trump down to being a Putin wannabe.
So, any final thoughts?
My final thought is really, what the fuck is going on and how can we stop it?
How can we stop it is, I think, the big missing question here. So, where you and I and our colleagues are trying to do a little bit through our activism, the Centre for Online Safety and Liberty, which we've just started up, and what we can do in our own little spaces, as long as it makes a little bit of difference. I mean, we can feel good about the impact that we're making, but how can we stop this on a bigger scale? It's really hard to even consider how we got into this mess in the first place. People are so brainwashed. People are so deluded. People have a mindset that is so foreign to the rest of us. And how do we reach them? How do we break them out of that? How do we educate them? And the more that internet is restricted, the harder that's going to do. The more the internet becomes like a mirror of Fox News, the harder it's going to be for people to get alternative sources of information, the less questioning they're going to do. And as you've said, the threat of defamation against political opponents, as happens in Putin's Russia and in other countries, limitations on media, expanding the definition of obscenity, all of these things add up together to create a compliant society, a society that doesn't question and that isn't going to be effective at overturning this conservative machinery. So we may be losing our opportunity the longer this goes on to turn it back. This may be our window. Like, we're seeing protests as we're recording this episode in thousands of individual protests around the country and even some around the world. Is it going to be enough? Is there something else? Do we need to, literally be rolling out the guillotines at this point? What is going to stop this? What do you think, Brandy?
What's going to stop it? Well, I can't sit here and pretend that I know. I can throw out some things I think would help, which is everyone waking the fuck up and paying attention to what's going on. God, I guess everyone just has to do everything that they can. We need to, I guess fascism dies when anger overcomes fear. Because the things they can do to you are so scary, but if you're angry enough, you stop being afraid. You're too angry to be afraid anymore. And I guess that's just the sort of attitude we've got to have. We got to be, don't be scared, be angry, and come and be unified. Because something that annoys me so much is the infighting amongst the left. We fight over the dumbest little minor bullshit. And we can't afford to focus our energy on fighting each other right now. We have to be unified. Like, even if there are things that certain people believe that I disagree with a lot, there aren't many things I disagree with more than what Trump is doing. So I think for the time being, we need to put it aside, our distaste of each other, and get together and do everything we can to fight the bigger enemy.
Yeah, I think in some ways the infighting is a reflection of our fear and hate towards the outsiders. It's the same emotion turned inwards. And so I want to push back maybe a little. This is going to sound very touchy-feely, but we all know what Yoda warned us about. He said, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate leads to suffering, and it ends up in the dark side. So the alternative, and this is the part that sounds touchy-feely, is love. I think, no, stay with me, because I think a lot of the pushback has to come from a place of love rather than from a place of hate. And what I mean by that is a place of empathy for the people who are being harmed. Migrants are being harmed, queer people are being harmed, women are being harmed. And our anger, yes, our righteous anger, has to come from a place of concern for them. It has to come from our love of diversity, our love of freedom, and not just our fear of what's happening to us. I think the fear can be almost a straitjacket where we feel like we've got nothing we can do. But yeah, as you said, banding together and doing so in a way that upholds our values of empathy and love and compassion, I think ultimately is what we need. We need the strength of that to draw on that to be able to transform it into effective opposition.
Like when we were both, when I was trying to do my project, my website, I contacted you because you were doing something that aligned with what I was trying to achieve. Like, obviously my website didn't take off, but I think if there's any hope that something like what I was trying to achieve ever materializes, it'll because I've contacted you and I'm working with you, because you have so many skills and knowledge that I completely lack. I'm completely rudderless in this without you, Jeremy. So I feel like, yeah.
Having a little love fest here as well.
Yeah, but no, I am very grateful for you for just giving me so much of your expertise and your guidance because I had no idea what I was doing. And yeah, the only reason I have any hope for any of the bigger things I want to achieve is because I have your help. So I suggest to anyone else listening to this who wants to achieve something, go out and find someone else who wants to achieve something similar and put your resources together. And it'll be so much easier if you're not going alone.
Well, we haven't planned this, but this is just begging for a segue into talking about COSAL again. So COSAL, the Centre for Online Safety and Liberty, is the organization that hosts this podcast. And we are actually looking for people to volunteer and help out with this fight in a broad sense. It's not all about fighting. It's about creating. It's about enjoying yourself. It's about community. But in doing that, we're also building up a foundation of opposition to fascism, just in the nature of what we're doing. So whether you want to do advocacy, whether you want to create art, whether you want to code software, whether you want to form community, there are ways for you to do that through the organization that we're starting up. So please jump onto our website, the COSAL website, which will be in the show notes. We'll also include in the show notes some references from the things that Brandy's been talking about, so you can find out more about defunding of broadcasting and the Comstock Act and age verification and all of these things, Times versus Sullivan. We'll have all of those links. You can check them out. So any final words, Brandy, before we sign off for this month?
Let's survive.
Okay, I can get on board with that. So thanks very much, everyone, for listening. Please leave your comments, like the very nice comments that we had from an anonymous furry on last month's episode. We want to hear your comments as well. And be back next month. We'll have most likely a special guest to talk to you. We'll be revealing all the details in due course. So that's it for this episode. And thanks again for listening. It's goodbye from me, Jeremy.
And goodbye from me, Brandy.